Videos on that needs to be on right now.
Okay, so welcome council member staff and those of you who are participating with us electronically to our council meeting for October 20th. We'll begin with a roll call.
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Rennie.
Here.
Councilmember Sayoc.
Here.
Vice Mayor Spector.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Jensen.
Here. Do we have a closed session report?
Yes, good evening. Prior to tonight's regular session, council met in closed session to discuss the evaluation of the town attorney and the town manager, and also discuss compensation. No action that was taken that requires reporting under the Brown Act.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Schultz. The next thing we do is report out to the community and to other members of the council and the staff, things that we might have been doing in our capacity as representatives of the town between our last council meeting on October 3rd and now. So with that, of the Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I attended the Finance Committee meeting, participated in the Santa Clara County COVID calls, attended or participated in the West Valley Sanitation District Board meeting, and attended the General Plan Advisory Committee meetings. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Sayoc.
Since our last meeting, I also participated with Finance Committee and represented Los Gatos at the League of California Cities Conference.
Councilman Rennie.
Thank you. Since our last council meeting, I attended a couple more of the SPUR conference sessions and a couple of the League of Cities sessions that Councilmember Sayoc mentioned. On 10/8, I filled in for Councilmember Sayoc at the Cities Association Legislative Action Committee and the board meeting. I assume she was doing League of Cities stuff at the time. I attended the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority Risk Oversight Committee and the board meeting where we approved the updated strategic plan, including expanded plans for programs to decarbonize and assist our member agencies in their climate goals. I would like to remind our staff there are grants for planning of community resilience for the member agencies. The program aims to reduce the likelihood of outages, minimize impacts, and support job creation through diverse projects to mitigate the effects from climate change. Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority also provides significant rebates to pay for EV charging equipment and installation of eligible chargers. A participant can receive up to $480,000 per site for DC fast charge stations and $120,000 for level 2 chargers if we're interested. There's also free assistance to help with planning or design of EV charger installations. In addition, Silicon Valley Clean Energy is offering free technical assistance for design of all electric new buildings or upgrades to existing. On 10/12, I chaired our Finance Committee where we reviewed our investment policy. On 10/14, I chaired our Conceptual Development Advisory Committee with Councilmember Sayoc. We discussed a proposed development off of Top of the Hill Road for a property that is currently in Williamson Act. On 10/15, I chaired the VTA Congestion Management Program Committee. On 10/19, in my role as the Congestion Management Chair, VTA gave me an update on their developing climate plan. On 10/19, the Silicon Valley Bike Coalition did a presentation of their network priority tool that I attended. For this tool they've developed that allows cities to analyze their bike routes and help them prioritize where the next improvements might want to occur. And on 10/19, I also listened into the Downtown West community meeting for the Google development project at Deer Dawn Station. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Rennie. I went to the General Plan Advisory Committee meeting and the VTA Policy Advisory Committee meeting among various other phone calls and or discussions. Ms. Pavetti, is there a report from the town manager?
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. Yes, a couple of things. First of all, you've probably noticed the 2 ballot boxes in front of the library, and the single ballot box down by the stairwell at Town Hall. These are all legitimate county registrar of voter boxes. So please deposit your ballots. The public should be aware that the registrar of voters is picking up ballots pretty frequently. So that way the boxes will not be overflowing. So please do vote, and those boxes are available for public use. This week on 10/22, which is Thursday night, we are hosting another in our series of community workshops. This one is a community culture workshop starting at 7 p.m. on Zoom, and the information for participants is available on the town website. We welcome everyone to join us. It will also be streamed live on KCAT, and we are recording it, so that way the public can watch after the fact if they're not able to join us. But we'd really love for people to join us. On 10/28 next week, we will be doing COVID testing at the Adult Recreation Center right at the corner of Villa and Main Street. So please make your appointment beginning tomorrow, the 21st of October. We've got lots of space for our residents to come in and our businesses to come on in and get free COVID testing. And then we are continuing to recruit for our boards and commissions. Applications are due on Friday, the 6th of November. Please sign up. We've got great opportunities and a whole host of different opportunities: Planning Commission, Personnel Board, Building Board of Appeals, and other opportunities. So please sign up. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pavetti. And I just wanted to add on the voting, the Registrar of Voters this year, I think actually maybe the entire state has an app you can sign up for called Where's My Ballot? So if you want to track what's happened with your ballot after you turn it in or vote, you can see that it's been received, that it's been collected. I put mine in the town box and got a little notice that it got collected. So that was very exciting. Has not been counted yet, but it's a good way to make sure that your vote, where your ballot is and what's happening. So if you're interested, sign on for that. And with that, that brings us to our consent calendar. Consent calendar are generally things that the council and staff believe can be acted upon in a single motion because they're largely uncontroversial or have been considered previously, and we're just reaffirming our previous decision. Any member of the council may still pull an item from consent, as may any member of our participating group. If you'd like, I'm going to call on the council first and see if there's any council people that want to pull an item from consent, which now consists of 1 through 6. Okay, seeing no one, I'll look to those who are joining us this evening and see if anyone wants to pull an item. If you would like to, use the function on your Zoom that allows you to raise your hand, and I'll see your hand and call on you. If you're joining us by phone, I think it's *9. And I don't see anyone. So I'm going to close the comment period and look to the Vice Mayor for a motion.
Move to approve the consent calendar.
Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
Seconded by Councilwoman Sayoc. And as we are doing electronically, we are doing roll call votes on all of our motions. So Vice Mayor,
Yes.
Councilwoman Sayoc,
Yes.
Councilman Rennie,
Aye.
and the mayor votes aye, passes unanimously. Thank you. Which now provides time for verbal communications. Verbal communication is the time when you can address the council on something that is not on our regular agenda. So what we're considering tonight on our regular agenda are changes, proposed amendments to the Hillside Development Standards, largely related to visibility analysis, and a consideration of an appeal by the Planning Commission decision regarding Summerhill's request to eliminate underground parking. If you'd like to talk to us about something that I've not mentioned, you have 3 minutes to do so. Because they're not on the agenda, we won't engage in questions or a discussion. We'll simply take your information. That said, is there anybody that would like to talk to the council now about something not on our agenda? And as always, I give it a couple of minutes to give you an opportunity to make sure you got your electronics working and can raise your hand. And as we go into our, I don't see anyone. So we're going to move on from our verbal communications to those substantive items on our agenda.
Excuse me, Mayor.
Yes.
There is one
Ms.
hand.
Ah, okay, I didn't give it enough time. Catherine Summers.
Good evening, Council. It's Catherine Summers with the Chamber of Commerce. I just wanted to mention our first ever senior drive-through resource fair, which is scheduled for next Wednesday, October 28th in the Methodist Church parking lot there on Church Street. The event is hosted by the Chamber as well as the Saratoga Area Senior Services Center. And our sponsor of the event is El Camino Hospital. It's a great way, please share it with everybody. It's a great way to get our seniors out of their houses and to come on down for this drive-through resource fair. Featured at the fair, we will have the County Fire Department, our own Los Gatos Montessorino Police Department, El Camino Hospital, the Chamber, and the Rotary Club will be there. And we are beginning a pilot program on digital inclusion for seniors. It's a really awesome pilot program that we are going to attempt to do to try and get some of our seniors a little more digitally connected with everything going on in the community. So thank you. Have any questions, please call the Chamber. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Summers. Anyone else? Okay, I'm not seeing anyone else raising their hand, so I am now going to move to the substantive part of our agenda. As I said, we have two items on tonight. The first is item number 7, which is consideration of proposed modifications to the Hillside Design Guidelines centering on visibility analysis, what counts, what doesn't count, what should be included in whether something's visible or not. When we begin, we will begin with, I think most of you have participated with us before, but I'm going to go over the kind of basics. We'll first have a presentation from staff. I'll give council members an opportunity to ask preliminary questions. We'll then hear from members of the public who want to speak on the item. When everyone is done, and I think some people who are new to participating, welcome to you, but we do give only one opportunity to speak, so you will have one opportunity. The council may ask you questions after your presentation, so please stand by for that. When everyone has spoken and answered questions, then I'll close the public hearing, and the council will then have an opportunity to ask more questions, to make statements, to discuss the matter, and ultimately to make motions. So that's how we're going to proceed this evening, and I think the person that's going to give us the report tonight is Ms. Schupman.
Yes, good evening, Mayor and council members. The item in front of you is a consideration of a modification to chapters 2 and 3 and 9 of the Hillside Development Standards and Guidelines regarding the visibility analysis as recommended by the Policy Committee and the Planning Commission. On September 28th, the Planning Commission forwarded a recommendation of approval to the council of these proposed modifications from the Policy Committee that would modify Chapter 2 to provide written guidelines as to what elements of an exterior can be included in an elevation for the purposes of a visibility analysis, and to modify an image on page 29 of Chapter 3 to be in compliance with the amended defensible space zones. The Planning Commission also recommended additional modifications for the following 3 items of discussion that had a split vote by the Policy Committee and are included in the draft resolution tonight. One would be that existing trees or branches that are subject to clearing in zones 2 and 3, as described in the defensible space requirements, shall not be included in a visibility analysis. Secondly, as described in Division 2 of Chapter 29 of the Code, existing trees that meet the exception and may be removed or severely pruned without a permit, but are proposed to remain as part of an application, may not be included in a visibility analysis. In addition, all trees which have a diameter of less than 8 inches may also not be included in a visibility analysis. And lastly, the Planning Commission recommended to maintain the existing language in Chapter 9, which requires that the Planning Commission is the deciding body for a single-family home that meets the allowable floor area and the maximum allowable height of 18 for a visible home. This concludes staff's presentation, but we are available for questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Schupman. Are there any questions from the council at this point? Mr. Rennie?
I have a few questions around the discussion about including walls and stairs and patios and things like that. That I guess I'd like to ask at this time, so that if there's any comments from the public, they can also comment, related to my questions. Under this proposal, is a wall around a garden or a patio counted in the visibility or the screening? And really the question is, we're talking about not counting walls, but I'm wondering, can this really be gained by changing the design around?
So under this proposal, a wall around a garden would not be included in the analysis.
And so, I mean, that's what I'm getting to. But can a wall around a deck or a patio be used to screen part of the house? Because let's say it's, not that part of the house behind the wall or deck. Let's say the wall is visible from our viewing platforms and is now screening part of the house. So does it count as part of the screening?
Under this recommendation, it would not count.
So in other words, the wall's visible, but it doesn't, are we counting the part of the house behind it or not? Because the part of the house behind it's not visible.
Thank you. So Joel Paulson, Community Development Director. I think you may get some further information from public speakers, but generally the discussion was only utilizing the house building elevations for the visibility analysis. I think the challenge is the project that came before council earlier this year, the determination was that it might be gaming the system the opposite way, where there were walls that were visible, but portions of those walls were also screened by trees. So that increased the allowable, potential visible house, where the reverse is also possible, where you could have very visible walls, but we would not be counting those as part of the visibility analysis.
And so another way to continue this, my questions is, what if I built, it says we don't include decks. What if I had a deck that kind of had a wall and I stuck it on the second story, which is likely to be visible? Is that area of the house counted in the visibility? Let's say it's visible and you see maybe a roof line peeking above a deck. But you're saying we don't count the deck as part of the area, but do we get to count it as a screen item since it's not counted, right? You can't see the house behind it or any wall that might be built on that deck, for example.
Sure, thank you, Councilmember. I think there's a lot of different possibilities where this could go, you'd be a pro or a con in the visibility analysis, but we would have to look at it on an individual basis. I think some folks wanted to simplify it so that it was strictly the elevations of the building. I think you could have, depending on the angle that you're looking from the viewing platform, you may have, let's just say you've got a deck and it's supported by a wall, but there's really no house behind it. It's just an elevated deck. There are instances where that could screen potentially part of the visible elevation of the house. But again, we're going to go back to the total area of the elevations that are visible for the house, and then make sure that it is not more than 24.5% of that. So you could have something where it's screening. I don't know that we really went down the path of what if you have a wall or a deck screening an elevation. I don't know that we delved into that conversation that I recall.
But the way it's proposed, if we have a deck that's visible, but let's say it's not screening the house, it's just visible, we don't count it at all.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions for now.
Okay, other questions from council? Okay, I don't see any, so I'm going to ask Those members of the public who do want to speak about this item, please raise your hand and I'll wait for a few minutes so that everyone who wants to speak can get their hand up. Okay, right now I'm only seeing one person, and that's David Weisman. So Mr. Weisman, you can go ahead and unmute yourself. And you have 3 minutes.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Item 1 from the original list presented to the policy committee in August concerned defining elevation. I support the identical approved decisions of both the policy committee and the planning commission. The next 3 policy committee items covered what trees and vegetation could be counted as screening when determining visibility. Items 2 and 3 covered those trees and vegetation that must be cleared or severely pruned under new Chapter 9 defensible space codes. The Planning Commission unanimously decided that when such vegetation must be removed, it should not be counted as providing screening. I agree. That leaves item 4. What about those hillside trees that don't have to be removed under Chapter 9, but can be removed without permits or replacement? Should they be counted as screening? Included in this category, as per the January 2020 revised tree protection ordinance, would be all fruit and nut trees, various non-native trees, many of which are flammable, think eucalyptus, and certain native trees. Item 4 was modified by the Planning Commission, and I recommend that you accept the latter's unanimous approval. At the Policy Committee meeting, one council member thought that, for example, an existing hillside grove of palm trees should be counted as screening. I remind the council that such trees are extremely flammable against all efforts of the tree protection ordinance to rid our hillsides of non-natives and, fortunately, rare in the hillsides. One council member also opposed Policy Committee item number 4 because they thought staff's use of the term subject to meant that the homeowner could clear anything. In fact, that is absolutely not true. The provisions of the tree protection ordinance still protect native hillside trees. In conclusion, I recommend that you approve all items as sent to you by the Planning Commission. Thank you.
Okay, any questions for Dr. Weisman? All right, seeing none, thank you very much. Anybody else on hillside guideline proposed revisions? Okay, I don't see anyone, so I'm going to give council then the opportunity to ask questions if you have any questions or additional questions of staff. And I'm going to suggest that if we don't have questions when we get to discussion and motions, that we do take the suggested items separately. So, you know, the elevation, the trees required to be removed by fire, trees that may be removed, and I'll call it streamlining for lack of a better way to abbreviate it. Hopefully we can organize it that way, then staff will know exactly what we're doing. And so any questions of staff? Okay, any discussion on any of the items? Or a motion on any of the items? And if your motion is to adopt everything that the Planning Commission did, then we have a resolution, which is, I believe, attachment something. It's contained in the staff report.
It's attachment 8, Mayor.
Attachment 8.
Yeah.
That would also address all of the 4 things that I've mentioned. Councilwoman Sayah.
Okay, I'll go ahead and start. I have no questions. And based on the thorough staff report, I'll try a motion that's contained on page 2 of our staff report that contains all the items that are contained in the Planning Commission recommendation that are also in attachment 8, exhibits A through C. That includes the elevation as well as the defensible space, what is considered visibility for native versus non-native, as well as the streamlining. So all of those are contained in my motion as recommended.
Okay, is there a second, Vice Mayor?
Second.
Okay, is there any discussion on the motion? Mr. Rennie?
I still think there's some confusion about, or there will be confusion about how we're counting walls and patios. I know we're saying now we're not going to count it as part of the elevation, whether it's visible or not. Maybe we go forward with this and we see how it works. And it's not clear whether, to me, in the language, whether if there's a visible wall and it's hiding part of the house, whether we're counting the house behind it or not. But maybe we just go forward this and see how it works out and bring it back for modification if we find issues.
Okay. All right, we have a motion and a second. My comment is, it's a member of the policy committee. Obviously, the policy committee was split. And I think that what I thought was pretty well represented in the Planning Commission transcript. So thank you for characterizing my position. My understanding of regarding the elevation is that there was some thought that if the walls, et cetera, were counted, that somehow that would transform your big house into something that was under the percentage required to have a visibility analysis. That's why it was discussed. That's why I think the policy committee went forward and included it, because it was a question of overall percentage visibility. So I did vote in the policy committee to adopt that. That's fine with me. Those things that need to be cleared per the WUI and the 100-foot defensible space. Yes, because they have to clear them, that's okay with me, but I don't think that the clearing includes necessarily the entire tree, but rather than to pick that apart, I'll just say, okay. Where I do have some difficulty is with, for those things, those trees that can be removed, but no one plans to remove them. Fruit tree, eucalyptus, whatever, palm tree, whether you believe they belong in the hillside or not, they're there. And as a result, I can't see the house. So I have difficulty in now essentially declaring for purposes of evaluation that those are invisible and that now the house can be seen. So that's why I voted against. That's why I have questions about it. And I'll go on to say what my vote is going to be. I have done a lot of work. Policy committee's done a lot of work. The council's done a lot of work for streamlining. So with respect to a house that meets all of our guidelines and standards, policies, ordinances, everything else, that's within the FAR, that's within the correct height, and otherwise meets all the criteria, I don't see any reason why that can't be approved administratively. It's subject to appeal at the DRC. In fact, this council has seen appeals come out of the DRC. So people know how to do it. We've seen indication that people are following it. And I honestly don't see a reason to, in effect, penalize or delay a homeowner who has worked hard to make sure that they fit everything. And, you know, by imposing fees for planning commission and just assuming it's going to go there and subjecting them to possible delay, we are, you know, if not necessarily penalizing them or locking them up, but potentially penalizing them by a delay of their plans and their finances. All that said, for the record, what I'm really opposed to is having the hillside guidelines come back again. And if I vote for this motion, I am very much hoping that we are done with visibility analysis, that we are done with trees, that we are done with redoing the hillsides. We have discussed this ad infinitum, and it's time to wrap it up. And so because I want to wrap it up, I'll vote for the motion. So that said, there's a motion on the floor. There's no other discussion. I'm going to call the question. Vice Mayor Spector.
Yes.
Councilwoman Sayoc.
Yes.
Councilman Rennie.
Yes.
And the mayor votes yes. Okay. Thank you very much. Now we're going to move on to item 8, which is a discussion of Planning Commission's hearing and denial of Summerhill's request to eliminate the requirement for underground parking at Phase 1 Market Hall of the North 40. So I am unclear about who is going to be presenting that staff report. Somebody help me out with that.
Also,
I will.
I'm sorry, Ms. Shupin,
Yes.
please go ahead.
Right, good evening, Mayor and council members. The item in front of you tonight is an appeal of a planning commission denial. The project is a request for a modification to an existing architecture and site application to remove underground parking for construction of a commercial building in the North 40 specific plan area. The planning commission reviewed the project at 4 different meetings, and on September 8th, the commission voted to deny the application, finding that the proposal was not in compliance with the North 40 specific plan. The applicant appealed this decision on October 1st, based on findings 1 and 2, that the planning commission's decision was an error or abuse of discretion and was not supported by substantial evidence in the record. A supplemental letter from the applicant and the applicant's attorney providing additional information related to the appeal was included as attachments 22 and 23 of your packet this evening. An addendum report responding to a question from council, from a council member, and additional public comments have been provided by a desk item report for this evening's meeting. Lastly, the public noticing completed for this project tonight includes notice to properties within 300 feet, a posting in the Los Gatos Times Weekly, a posting in the town's October 16th weekly newsletter, a posting on the town's What's New page of the website, and a posting to the town's social media accounts on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and Nextdoor. This concludes staff's presentation, but we are happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Shupin. I have no doubt that there are a lot of questions regarding this. And so if members of the council have preliminary questions that they would like to have answered prior to listening to the public testimony, please go ahead and do that. But I do intend to allow ample time for questions once we have heard that, but I don't want to discourage anyone from asking questions now. So are there any questions that members of the council would like to ask prior to listening to members of the public? I do not see any, so I'm going to move to the public hearing. And so there are a lot of attendees. Those of you that would like to speak, please raise your hands and I'll give some time to get some hands up, and then we'll start calling on people. You'll have 3 minutes and you may be subject to questions from the council. As I wait for any hands to go up, Ms. Shupin mentioned that we have had input, written input and email input and testimony from members of the public through the 4 planning commission hearings. We've also had desk items today that were quite extensive, a memo from the town attorney, and other items that I know that we've all read. Mr. Rennie.
Process question, are we not going to have the appealer speak and then public and then?
I'm waiting for somebody to raise their hand and I don't see anybody. So I'm vamping. This is called vamping.
Oh, okay.
So Mayor, this is Shelley. So since this is an appeal, doesn't the appellant get the 5 minutes presentation?
I'm sorry. Yes, whatever they get, but somebody needed to raise their hand and they finally have. So that's good. All right. So I have a hand raised from Michael Keeney of Summerhill Homes. If there is a team for Summerhill, as we do when we do this in person, the team gets 5 minutes, not each member of the team. So Summerhill team, you have 5 minutes. So go ahead and unmute. And if there's more than one, please identify yourselves. Mr. Keeney.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good evening, Mayor Jensen, members of the council and staff. My name is Michael Keeney, and I am the development manager for Summerhill Homes on the North 40 project. As you have probably observed, we are well underway with construction of the project. We've started construction of new homes, and we are progressing on off-site transportation improvements of well over $10 million to support the project and expand traffic capacity in the area for the benefit of the town and our future residents. As currently designed, the Market Hall garage has an excess of 179 parking spaces. As determined by the town's parking regulations, excuse me, the excess parking spaces were included in the original design based upon the previous developer's strategies related to the potential future development of phase 2 of the North 40 property. That developer is no longer involved in the Market Hall development, and Summerhill Homes has no involvement in the potential development of Phase 2. There is no obligation in the conditions or the specific plan for Market Hall to provide parking for future phases. Accordingly, we request the elimination of the basement, reducing the parking spaces in the garage by 127. This leaves a total of 176, which is 52 more than is required by the parking regulations. In order to clarify some confusion regarding the parking for the remainder of the transition district, we prepared a table, Exhibit A. This exhibit takes the gross square footage for Market Hall, along with the gross square footage for the remainder of the transition district, and the land uses assumed in the Phase 1 architectural and site plan set on sheet 3.22. Exhibit A has been reviewed by town staff and correctly summarizes the parking that is required for the North 40 transition district. With the proposed modification, there will be a surplus of 52 parking spaces for the Market Hall building on lot 27 and 46 surplus spaces for the commercial transition district as a whole. Commissioner Hudis presented his own exhibit to the Planning Commission and used it as the justification for his motion to deny our request. We prepared a response letter to the assumption in his table and provided it to staff for review and inclusion in your staff report. Our application before you is consistent with the North 40 specific plan and the town code and still provides for excess parking for Market Hall and the commercial district. We respectfully ask for your consideration and approval of our application. We look forward to continuing to work with the town of Los Gatos and providing much needed housing for the community, and we're available to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Is it Keeney or Caney?
It's Keeney, thank you.
Keeney, okay, sorry. Questions for Mr. Keeney? Okay, I don't see any, so thank you. Any other member of the public that wants to talk to us about the North 40? I have a lot of attendees and no hands. You don't have to talk. We've definitely gotten your letters and communications, and we've all read the transcript of the Planning Commission. So if you don't wish to speak tonight, that's fine. Going, gone. Mr. Schultz, do I have to give a response to time to when there's been no presentation?
Yes, you do. Hopefully, since there's nothing to respond to, they won't take up their full 3 minutes.
All right, Mr. Keeney, you have 3 minutes to respond to what no one said. You don't have to. Your hand's up, so go ahead and unmute yourself.
I was just gonna, thank you for your time. We appreciate everything you guys have done. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Okay. That means it's up to council for questions and discussion. Mr. Redding.
I want to ask the obvious questions for staff. After the removal of the underground parking, is there an excess of parking per our code? And if so, how many?
There is an excess. Are you asking for the Market Hall itself or the entire transition district?
I'm asking for the current development, which doesn't include the entire transition district.
So yes, if we're just exclusively looking at the Market Hall, they do provide excess parking. They provide an excess parking of 52 spaces.
But this project also includes the senior building above it, which has some parking. So what that you can't build the seniors without building Market Hall without having the parking. So what's the total of this portion of the project?
So this total includes the senior parking, and that's 176 spaces.
And after they remove the garage, what is the excess spaces available, if any?
After they remove the below grade level?
Yes.
52 spaces.
Okay. Is there any gray area here that's subject to interpretation on how many spaces are required? I asked that because the Planning Commission seemed to pick a different number.
So I'm happy to jump in. Joel Paulson, Community Development Director. Mr. Hudis's table utilized some assumptions that were made in the phase one, most notably relating to potential restaurant and bar capacity. And so they used a number that was not part of the town code, trying to use the assumption of how many seats they might get in that space should that type of use come forward in the future. And so that is the majority. There were some questions as far as rounding up for the individual buildings. Typically in a project like this, we would not round up. We would look at the various buildings, their total square footage, and then add those together. In this instance, given the current parking requirements, 59,785 square feet of the commercial in the phase one is parked at one parking space per 300 square feet. And then there is also a community room, which is, I believe, 2,772 square feet, which is parked at one parking space for every 590 square feet. Should you want to round each of the other individual buildings up, that would be an additional 4 parking spaces, meaning for the total project and the transition district, there would still be in excess of 42 parking spaces from town staff's calculations.
And so if I can try to understand what you just said, the difference is our code now says we use area versus seats, and that's really the difference between the two?
That is the biggest difference, yes.
Okay, one more question if I could.
Sure.
And this is probably for the town attorney. I want to understand the applicability of the HAA and housing element law and the by right on this. Why is the denial of the denial of the changes, does that not prevent the building of the housing unit? Since it's not, let me restate that. By denying this, it doesn't prevent them from building the housing units. Why does the HAA and housing element law come into effect? And why is this?
So
and
the,
then- go ahead.
the HAA and the by right development have to do with applying objective standards as opposed to subjective standards. And that's the reason why I've brought it up, is for you to understand that because of those two laws and that the original project had to comply with both the HAA and the housing element law by right development, that a modification to that original project would also fall within those two laws. And therefore you must only apply objective standards and not subjective standards.
Okay.
You can always come back.
If you were able to find objective standards to deny this project, then you're able to do that. So it's not that you can't deny it, you just are limited to only objective standards.
Okay.
And Mr. Rennie and other members of the council, if as we go through other questions arise, you don't have a single opportunity. So are there other questions? I have a whole bunch. So Councilwoman Sayoc.
To staff and to town attorney. So can you explain to me, so our specific plan allows architecture and site application amendments, modifications, which is what we're doing here. My understanding is I appreciate the explanation of the applicability of the HAA here. What I'd like to understand is, what is the scope that we're looking at? The architecture, the application itself is the entire application, correct? So we're not just looking at the parking garage, we're looking at the applicability of any other potential changes that is associated with this project. Is that correct?
That is certainly correct. The modification is to the original ANS application, which opens it up to any other issues that may come out in the facts and evidence. So
Okay.
you're again, though, because the original project had to comply with objective standards. So do any changes that would be made.
Absolutely, absolutely. But again, the goal is looking at the entire project, which is
Yes.
why the HAA is applicable, because now we're
Correct.
looking at, okay.
Because
Thank
if you actually did separate this out and say, and this is a separate project, it's only for the senior housing and the market hall, then they don't make the 20% requirement, or I'm sorry, the 60% requirement for housing on that project, and therefore the HAA would not be applicable.
Okay. And actually, you bring up an interesting point there, Mr. Schultz. So the 20%, that's the 20% that we've used to determine our below market, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. I may have questions, but I can defer at this time.
Okay. Vice Mayor, any questions? Okay. Here we go. Bear with me, Council and Town Attorney. The Housing Accountability Act, which obviously was a factor in the original application, and the original application, although it considered the entire North 40 geographic area, it really only dealt with 20, such that it was nicknamed the North 20. And we have phase 1, and the only thing that we have approved is phase 1. There is no other approved project. When the council denied the original application, and then the town was sued, predictably, under the Housing Accountability Act for not stating objective standards, and then lost, it was because the town had denied a housing project and or reduced the density and not used the appropriate standards to do so. In my reading of the Housing Accountability Act, what its purpose, and it states its legislative purpose in it, and it has paragraphs that say what it's trying to do. And it's trying to create housing. And so it's trying to reduce discretion or impose standards on local jurisdictions so that they approve housing. When we have this before us, which only has to do with parking, Mr. Keeney made his presentation tonight. He did not say, if you deny this, we can't build it. If you deny this, it's not feasible. If you deny this, there's less houses. That has never been presented. I read the record super carefully. There is an allegation, if you will, or representation in Mr. Faber's letter that says, well, this is just like whatever, because we have to spend more. I would say, well, that's interesting, because when you signed on, this was a condition and you knew what the price is going to be, and now you don't want to pay that much. So it's not an extra cost. So Mr. Schultz, if a modification to a housing unit, even if I assume for a moment that this housing unit in phase 1 applied, it qualifies, which I don't necessarily concede. It doesn't affect the housing, doesn't reduce the housing, doesn't change the housing. Why does the Housing Accountability Act now apply? And I admit, I looked for cases, I didn't see anything. I saw, Mr. Schultz, what you said at Planning Commission. You said that you were doing the whole development for your assessment, and I wouldn't find it in case law. I didn't. So why does the Housing Accountability Act apply to what's essentially a parking question?
So I've heard that argument for the past 2 months, and it's a valid argument. And if that's the way council wants to rule, is the HAA is not applicable because you're not denying a project, you can certainly make those findings. And
Okay.
when I read the HAA and how it is to promote housing and requires objective standards, that's the way I come out on it, is that objective standards. I would say that if you throw out the HAA, you still have to do with our by right development under our housing element, which requires only objective standards. And again, you can say you're not denying any housing project, so therefore that's not applicable either. You still get back to my primary argument with the Planning Commission, and that is, as a quasi-judicial board, you have to make your decision based on your standards, or your laws, as we call them, your laws, your ordinances, your regulations and standards. And there is absolutely nothing in our specific plan or our zoning code that says they we're encouraging, we say nothing about underground parking or we should require over parking on a project.
Okay,
So throwing all that out, you'd still have to make that link between the evidence and the facts to show where in our standards we could require the extra parking on a project.
okay, fair enough. This project gets approved by the council with conditions of approval. And subject to public discourse over many months, years, several things were discussed. How high are the buildings? What's the view corridor? Gee, I really want the parking to be underground. I would like more open space. So once the town imposes conditions on a project that is approved for X number of housing, which is unchanged by this request, then what authority or enforcement or imprimatur do those conditions have? Because if I have to come in, I was reading the transcript and I was very interested in your response that about the conditions of approvals. Well, it's a blank slate. And as long as you come in and you do something that's under our standards, it's all right. And I would argue, well, that's fine. Let's say I'm a restaurant and the planning commission said, you can be open until 9 o'clock, even though the town standards say you can be open until midnight. And we impose a condition that says you have to close at 9. Now that restaurant comes in and says, town standards say midnight. So thank you very much. I'm open till midnight. Are you saying that is my hypothetical incorrect? Is my hypothetical because, and you'll say that's because the Housing Accountability Act is different. Now, what if I said it was a house that was too high and that the commission wanted,
So we'll use both
house
those
is
scenarios.
30 feet. Commission says 20 feet. Town says 30 feet is okay. Now what?
So I'll use both of those scenarios. The restaurant scenario, because their conditions of approval are given the 9 p.m., they would have to come in and ask for a modification of that conditions of approval, just as Summerhill has had to do in this case. When our parking regulations went from seats to square footage, Summerhill didn't just say, well, I don't need to do the underground parking. No, that was in the approval of the project. You're going to have to come in and ask for a modification. That would be for the same as a restaurant. The same would be as if you got approval for your home to build a 25-foot home, and that was the height limitations, but we raised our height limitations to 35 feet. That homeowner could come in and ask for a modification to go to 35 feet now.
Okay, which could still be denied.
If it was two homes, and you have the HAA, no, you'd have to grant that. So if there's two homes being built, 2 residential units, and we say you can go up to 35 feet in the residential area, you would have to grant that.
So the conditions of approval, in your opinion, are meaningless when there's a modification for a residential project. Am I summarizing?
Well, not meaningless. They have to come in and still show that they comply with the current regulations, but modifications happen many times to projects. The only way you can prevent that is by doing a development agreement, because then you actually have a contract between the town and the developer, and then we'd have to agree to those changes.
Okay, let me give you another scenario and then I'll ask you a different question. North 40 specific plan requires X percentage of open space. One of the considerations in approving the project, and one of the things that was touted by the applicant, was we're giving you more than you want. And we're still having these housing units. All right. Just like the parking, we're giving you more parking than you want. We're giving you more open space than you want. Now, developer comes in and says, you know what? That open space is pretty expensive. Doesn't change anything, but it's pretty expensive. So I want to change the open space. Would your opinion be the same that if the applicant came in on something that they were over, where the town regulation clearly said something different, could they come in tomorrow and say, I want to reduce the open space to the amount that's in the specific plan, and that this council would have to find objective criteria to say you can't do that?
So under your hypothetical, if in fact they were over and wanted to make that through a modification, yes, then they could. Just as if this project, what if it never vested and a new development project wants to come in brand new. They look at our current rules and regulations, and they comply with that. And that's why it is a blank slate. When you come in for a modification, you're looking to meet our standards.
Okay, one more and then I'll get to.
Those could be subjective or objective, but in this case, because of the HAA and the by right development.
One more question, then I'll get to Councilwoman Stack. Process question. We have a highly unusual situation where two members of the Planning Commission wrote a quote dissenting opinion regarding a decision of the Planning Commission, and then that got rebutted by another member of the Planning Commission. In the dissenting opinion, the two members of the Planning Commission state outright that they, in the words of our appellate ordinance, that there's error. Okay, now I'm going to make that into something that I understand. Let's say you have a trial court, and instead of one judge, you got 6 judges. 4 judges say guilty, 2 judges say not guilty. Now the 2 judges on appeal say, you know, those 4 judges, they're crazy. It's not guilty. How do I handle that? Do I just treat it as it's another email from a citizen of the town expressing their opinion that I have the discretion to evaluate?
That's exactly right. Your last one. They are responding as members of the town, citizens, and that's the weight you should give them at this point in time, not as judges of a lower appellate court.
Okay. Okay,
The
Councilwoman Stack.
decision as a whole is what you look at from the lower court.
Okay.
Not what individual judges said.
All right, Councilwoman Stack.
Okay, so I want to follow the mayor's line. It inspired some other questions for me. So let's take the opposite scenario where the applicant has looked at areas that the town has relaxed, such as parking, and would now like to take advantage of that, saying we went over, we're going to follow objective criteria, we'd like to reduce that for cost savings. Can we, because now we have an open Arkan site, can we as a town look at areas where we've discovered since this application was approved, where we have stronger language, and we can impose, again, if we have the justification and objective standards, to make changes to the Arkan site?
Yes, that's my opinion. You can. If they're objective standards and that you can put into the conditions of approval for this project. Certainly there's certain things, maybe, I don't know exactly what work they've done out there, but they might be vested in some issues. If you wanted to move a building, I don't even think that would be an objective standard, but I don't think you could then because they've done some underground work. But if there's something that from an objective standpoint can be added, absolutely.
Okay, and so one of the areas that I know that we have had more clarification since this North 40 application has gone to trial and since we've had the cases is clarification on our own BMP and how the housing density falls into play. So that's in clear area where we have more information, where the town, if we wanted to impose more affordable housing, could impose at this time since this application was initially approved, correct?
It's correct.
Okay. And that would be, in your opinion, objective criteria that we can impose to the town and actually satisfies the HAA because now we're asking for more affordable housing to meet the intent of the HAA.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, other questions or discussion, Mr. Brennan?
I'm ready to make comments and propose a motion, if that's okay with you.
Well, let's make sure that the Vice Mayor doesn't have any questions. She's saying no. Okay, go ahead.
Some comments first. I think extra parking actually is kind of an evil. We've heard testimony from members of our downtown community that extra parking out at the North 40 makes the downtown not competitive to the North 40. People will want to go there because it's easier to park and it's hard to park downtown. We got testimony, earlier on that. I think extra parking also encourages driving instead of taking alternative modes of travel. People that live sort of close to the North 40 could walk over to enjoy some of the commercial or even visit people that live there or something. If there's extra parking, then you say, oh, it's easy to go jump in my car and drive over there. So I think that extra parking decreases that encouragement. The added parking above our required code also adds the cost of building, which is building this senior affordable building. And I've seen the council just even last time and tonight show this value that we would like more housing and affordable housing to be built. In fact, tonight our BMP ordinance was up for the second reading, where we changed some items to make it more cost effective to provide housing. So I believe this request is really about the cost of the affordable housing in a way. And the applicant is asking to reduce their costs by approximately $4 million, from my understanding. Since the changes still provide enough parking per our code, I propose that the applicant share the savings with the community by converting 3 of the market rate units to affordable units and follow our BMP guidelines in terms of, they have to be dispersed throughout and they have to have the same amenities and so forth as the other units. And I can also provide some legal justification for why we can do that. When this project was approved in 2017, the number of required affordable units was based on the 237 market rate units before the density bonus. And that came up to a required 47, and they provided us 50. So it looked okay. But if you use the full 270 market rate that includes the density bonus, then our BMP requirement should have been 54. And so they're short by 4. Then when we went to court over the denial and then the attorney fees, there was, part of the issue was over whether we are including the bonus units or not. And the court stated that the applicant's contention that total units should be interpreted in substance as base units, not counting additional units granted as bonus units under the state density bonus law. The court said this is not a reasonable interpretation of statutory language, and the court found that the development included 320 total units for the purpose of determining whether or not the development meets the definition of the housing development under the HAA. So there is nothing in our BMP code that requires the town to have given credit for the density bonus housing. All total units at market rate should be counted, and as just as the court did not reduce the total under HAA, we shouldn't do that under our BMP ordinance. So that says adding 3 units brings us back, and I don't say 4 because we're actually reducing the market rate a little bit, but adding the 3 units fits under this. Would you like me to make a formal motion out of this? Or have discussion?
That's not up to me to decide. If you'd like to make a motion, we'll see if there's a second.
I would like to make a motion out of this, but now I got to add in all the other stuff, right?
If all you're doing is adding in findings for the staff report, you don't need to do that right now.
Yeah.
Let's just see if you have
a motion as is, and then we can worry about the findings.
All right, Councilwoman Seok.
May I ask questions of staff?
Absolutely. Yes, you may.
Or of, I guess, council. My understanding is that we, if I could just get further explanation about why 3, not the 4, that seems to be the discrepancy. And with the senior housing that Eden is doing, my understanding is it's 449 with 1 as a apartment, so a manager's apartment. And so why not ask for 5 to get us to the 54? So there's 2 separate questions there. And so I don't know if it's staff or the town attorney that can best address that.
Well, actually,
Either
why
Joel
don't,
and I,
just a sec. let's find out the maker of the motion. Let's figure out his reasoning, and then let's figure out the legal answer. So Mr. Rennie?
So there's one part of it I mentioned early on, share the cost. If we add cost beyond what Summerhill is saving, or we don't give them some cut of the savings, they're not, why would they go with providing us the extra affordable units? So I believe what we want to do is encourage more affordable units. So I want to give Summerhill some incentive. I believe Summerhill can just go back to the old agreement and not take our new motion. I assume that's correct. So I'm trying to provide a split in the dollars to incentivize Summerhill to provide us more affordable units. And then the other part, I thought I can answer. The manager's unit is not a very low unit, but I think it's still a BMP unit. So I think it's counted as 50 units, not 49, that are actually below market. And then the reason I also came up with 3, in addition to the, splitting the cost, was it 270, times 20% comes to 54. If we remove 3 units, now do we really come up to 53, or 52 and a half or something like that? So I don't, unless we decide to make them build additional units, so they'd have 270 plus 4 more units, but then they'd have to bring us back a new architecture and site, I assume, in order to do that, which gets to be a lot more complicated. So that's my reasoning. Now let's see if staff, how much.
Okay, so I'm just going to summarize that Mr. Rennie is proposing a compromise and not going to the maximum. Staff, I'm sorry, Mr. Schultz, for interrupting you earlier, but do you have anything, or Mr. Schultz or any of the member of staff have a comment on this?
It was just to say that there are 50 restricted affordable units. 49 are the very low, and the manager's unit is
Moderate.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we do have a motion on the table. Questions, friendly amendments, discussion regarding the motion on the table? I just.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mayor.
Yeah, let me just ask a question to make sure that. So Mr. Schultz, you told us earlier that by making the request regarding the parking, Summerhill was opening up the entire application, and that whatever the town had changed retroactively for its standards would now apply. So a retroactive change to our parking requirements. So here, that is a retroactive requirement that favors the applicant. This is a retroactive application that does not favor the applicant. Does it make a difference at all, or by making their request for modification, have they just opened themselves up to whatever?
They have opened themselves up to make changes to their project to meet our standards and regulations. My only caveat to what I said earlier is when the application is deemed complete, that's when it locks in our laws, ordinances, and regulations. You couldn't change the parking standard now and say they need to comply with it. But our BMP has always been 20, anything over 101 units has to be 20%. We used a calculation allowing for the density bonus to be included. And as Mr. Councilmember Rennie said, the court has said that does not needed to be included in the total units under the HAA. And I think the same analogy can be made to our BMP program that says 20% of market rate. That's why we can't get to 320 units. You have to take out 50 units that are below market. So their market rate on this is 270, not 237.
Okay, and one more question before we proceed with the motion that I have for Mr. Schultz. My earlier question / argument to you regarding the parking was that Summerhill has never said that their request vis-a-vis the parking, if we don't grant it, we won't build it, we can't build it, it's not feasible, we're lowering the density. if Summerhill comes in, hypothetically, let's say the council does this, Summerhill can always walk away. They're not required to accept this. They just don't get their parking modifications, such that, could they come in and say, well, you've imposed something on us that now makes it impossible for us to build this housing by requiring something additional. And that cost requirement now makes it not feasible. Just curious if
And they can stick with their current project, as Councilmember Rennie said. They could build the parking structure, which you said they haven't, wouldn't cause any economic issues. So they would have a choice under Mr. Rennie's proposal to either build the parking structure and move forward without the modification, or do the modification without a parking structure. And I think you said 3 more.
well, no,
affordable
so
units.
I'm just worried that if the council does do this, that somehow the argument is we've created a barrier to housing by making it more expensive, by saying you've got to put in, 3 more units, take away your market rate. They're now, their performers and stuff don't pencil out. Oh, we can't do it. But is the saving clause for what I've just said that they always have the option to stick with their current
Yes.
approval?
Yes.
And that's,
And-
and
and
in
also,
that way,
again-
the town doesn't run afoul of any HAA.
And again, we're not afoul of the HAA because we're applying objective standards.
Okay. Okay, sorry, those are my questions. Any other questions regarding the motion? Councilwoman Sayoc.
I wanted to follow up on something the town attorney just said, that we're not violating the HAA because we're following objective standards. But if we were just to deny it because we don't believe that the parking garage in any way affects the housing, that has no subjective attachment to it, does it? I mean, I'm just following what the mayor has said. The applicant has asked a change to a condition that they had approved, that they had accepted, and they've asked for a modification. And as we have seen, it's specific to parking. We have not touched the housing. We have not imposed additional requirements. And so that by itself, we have done nothing to prohibit further housing, correct?
I mean, I guess the argument would be is that by I think where the mayor's coming from, by imposing 4 units or 3 units as BMP units, the whole project then becomes infeasible. I don't believe that.
Let me clarify, Mr. Schultz, what my position is. I have a couple positions. One, does the HAA really apply here? Because this modification does not affect the housing units produced by this approved application. That's my first one. And you said, yep, I could make that finding if I wanted to. And if I just took the North 40 phase 1, I don't even get to the 66%. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, if we went with the motion on the floor, regardless of that earlier position, if we went with the motion that's now on the floor, and we said, thank you, Summerhill, for bringing this application back to our attention. We've changed our BMP regulations, and now we say you owe us 3 more affordable units, and we have objective standards in our BMP that we can look to require that of you. My then question was, by doing that, have we somehow now made the project infeasible? And I think that your response to that was no, because they can always do the original project, correct? Mr. Schultz?
Correct.
Yes? Okay, so and then I think what Councilwoman Sayoc is saying is, well, okay, that's nice, but couldn't we just say no to the modification if we conclude that the HAA doesn't apply because you're not at 66% and we're not affecting the housing units?
So you have to get past just the HAA. You have to show that our housing element law does not apply to this project, and then you have to show where anywhere in our laws we can require over parking on a project. So when you get to those three final steps, then you could be there with a decision that would stand up in court.
Okay. Several people had their hand up. Councilwoman Sayak, then Vice Mayor, then Mr. Rennie.
Actually, I did not have my hand up.
Okay, sorry. Okay, Vice Mayor?
Thank you. I had my hand
You
up.
did.
I just wanted for clarification. Right now, we have a motion. First of all, has that motion been seconded?
No, there were questions.
Okay. Then the second question is, does that motion assume that it is a granting of the appeal or a denial of the appeal?
Let's ask Mr. Rennie.
Well, it has to grant the appeal and then add conditions onto that, right? I'm adding the conditions of adding the BMP. And I also wanted to, well, maybe I'll wait till you give me the floor. I had another comment on some of the discussion.
Madam Vice Mayor, did that answer your question from the maker of the motion?
For the time being, yes.
Okay, before I give Mr. Rennie the floor, I want to follow up on the Vice Mayor's question. Why would the motion that's proposed now have to grant the appeal? Because if by asking for a modification, if it's true that the entire application has been opened, why is it tied to the appeal? Can't we deny the appeal and by the way, we're adding this? Not only can you not have parking, but you have to do this?
So if you wanted to, your motion could be to deny the appeal. And like I said, you'll have to go through those steps of how the HAA doesn't apply, how our housing element doesn't apply, and where the subjective findings in our laws can require the extra parking. So you could get through that, and then you could add on top of this, adding the three BMP units also. That would be the denial. The other way is to grant the appeal because you are allowing them to continue with the removal of the underground parking and then impose the additional BMP units.
But that's up to the maker of the motion, whether he does really actually want them to continue with the underground parking, right? I'm assuming Mr. Rennie wants to do that, but
that was my
council has
understanding of the
discretion.
motion.
So Mr. Rennie, if there's no other questions right now, everybody's looking kind of confused. Can you just restate your motion in very simple terms? Or as simple as possible?
So first of all, I don't think I could make the findings required in order to deny, as Mr. Schultz said, it's much easier to make the findings that for granting the appeal and make the finding that the Planning Commission erred because they used data and information that are not in our code or supported by the record and they did that because they weren't able to come up with the findings to deny that request. So if those are our two choices, I find it much easier to grant the appeal, but add conditions onto it. And then, so you asked me to restate it.
Yes, please.
And so then it would have to be to appeal and add the conditions. And so granting the appeal allows them to remove the underground garage, which saves them $4 million, and add the requirement that they convert 3 units to BMP units per following our BMP guidelines. And so that's the simple part. And I would also argue this doesn't make, from using just liberal numbers, they're saving more than $4 million building this garage, not building the bottom layer of the garage. Converting 4 units is probably less than the difference between what they could have sold them for and what they will sell them for, because I'm not requiring them to pick their 3-bedroom units, for example. They could pick 1-bedroom units to do this with. The delta is going to be less than $600,000. So 3 units is probably less than $2 million. So they're actually going to get a little more than half of the savings. I don't think this makes it more expensive for them to do the project. I think it makes it less expensive for them.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to grant the appeal, which allows the removal of the underground parking, but to add a new condition to the approved application, which is to provide 3 affordable units per our BMP program as in its most recent iteration. Is that correct, Mr. Rennie?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second for that motion? Or any questions to clarify it before we go forward? Okay, thank you for your patience, Mr. Rennie, but I'm not seeing a second. Does anyone want to attempt a different motion or discussion? Councilwoman Sayoc.
I have another question of staff. I apologize for the many questions. Our BMP program, basically, when the units are for sale, what we have asked of applicants is that we receive BMP units that are similar to what is being sold. And so if staff can remind me, of the 270 market rate, we have a variety of units. We have some as large as 3-bedroom, some as small as 1-bedroom. And so if this were a brand new application, what would we be asking our applicant to give to us through the BMP program? We'd be asking 20%, so that would be 4, but it would be of similar size and unit, correct?
So I can jump in for Ms. Shootman. We recently modified the BMP guidelines, as you might remember from a couple weeks ago. And so some of that language, and I look to Ms. Shootman to correct me, I think we loosened some of that language to provide opportunities. So, you know, I don't know that it is as strict as it was previously. So there would be opportunities there to look for options. I think the challenge you have here is we had this conversation, I believe, and the town attorney can probably remind us of some of that conversation. They chose to fulfill their BMP requirements through the senior housing. And so the court found that, to my recollection, we could not make them spread them across as we typically would with other projects. But I, again, would defer to the town attorney. If the council has direction as far as what you want to see in those, should there be additional units requested, we're definitely open to that direction, and that could be part of the affordable housing agreement.
Did that answer your question, Councilwoman Sayoc, or kinda?
It gave me information to think about. Thank you.
Okay, does anyone have any other questions or want to try a motion? Okay, I'm not enthusiastic about any of the options that we've been presented with, and I'm not sure that where I am on the analysis that we've been presented with. I like the idea of getting housing if we can. I'm very skeptical that if given the opportunity to remove the parking garage, that the applicant will provide housing. I think they might just say, fine, we're going to stick with, I don't know what they'll say, but I'm not sure that telling them now that free market rate units are going to become affordable is going to be a productive path, although I would love to think it would be. I have difficulty with the analysis that we've been provided on the Housing Accountability Act. And I did look for case law to see if I could figure out whether my gut instinct is correct about this, but everything that I see with respect to the Housing Accountability Act is it is designed to prevent municipalities from denying or reducing the density of housing. And it's designed to do that by reducing discretion, objective standards. It's designed to do that by making sure that developments are feasible. It's designed to do that by streamlining in lots of different cases. What it's not designed to do is determine questions about parking. So if the parking doesn't affect the housing units, I have real trouble in imagining a scenario where someone goes to court and says, Your Honor, the town denied housing under the Housing Accountability Act because we couldn't take away the underground garage. Well, council, did you ever say it was not feasible? No. Did you ever say you weren't going to build the housing? No. Okay, so I have trouble figuring out how that works. That said, my other problem or issue is we had a ton of discussion about phase one. The only approved application we have is phase one. And to now count the entire development, I went back and I looked at the court's ruling and I read it. And yes, at the time we had the whole North 40 on the table, but it's really coming down to the charts and the statements that the council used in denying that project, which denied housing, which is why we lost. So we weren't really, here we're doing something different. The 66% is the entire project. Mr. Schultz said that that's, I think that's a conservative way to go, but I don't know that we have to look at it that way. And I don't quite understand how, but going away from the conditions of approval that were imposed and then accepted by the applicant now suddenly creates a burden on a project that even with those conditions supplied the housing. So I don't know why the town can't say, our conditions were based upon the public testimony and everything else, this is the condition of approval, satisfy it, great. You want to modify it, great, come in and tell us why. The reason that I've heard is it's too expensive and we think we can't. So I have difficulty with this entire issue, and I'm looking to somebody on the council to figure out these issues and bail me out. And I'm looking at the vice mayor. So Vice Mayor, go for it.
Well, I'm not raising my hand to figure everything out and to answer all your questions. So that's what I'm not doing. I have to start out by saying this is the most unusual appeal that it's ever come when I've been on the council. I mean, the decision-making at the planning commission level, the fact that we have information coming up from planning commissioners to the council. I took a much more process analysis, what I think is a process analysis to the issues before us. My thinking was nothing like what anybody has said up here on this Zoom screen. So I am coming from a different place, but why not? Because everybody else has been. And let me back up a little bit because people have touched upon this, but I just want to put it in context. This is coming before us, because we had a court decision that said that our decision on the council level was wrong, and that we needed to apply objective standards to our decision-making process, and that what we need to do is have certainty in our analysis and our decisions. We couldn't be subjective. We needed to be defined and certain. And so I was taking that way of thinking to the decision that we have to make tonight, whether or not we grant the appeal, whether or not we deny the appeal. So again, for me, I had to put it in context. I put it in context of the dates. On June 17th, 2015, the specific plan was approved for the entire property. Section 2.5.8 of the specific plan mandated parking requirements consistent with Zone 4. Then, 2 years later, June 9th, 2017, we, the council, deny the application and the court grants the developer's writ, allowing the project to proceed forward, absent objective reasons for denial. Then, a couple months later, August 1st, 2017, the applicant's architecture and site application and vesting tentative map applications were approved. Within that approval, it stated that the project shall comply with the North 40 specific plan, including the Zone 4 parking requirements. Now, the developer is coming forward, and the developer is saying, as many of you have mentioned, we want the parking standards to be modified per the 2018 ordinance, which occurred after the specific plan, court order, and approval of this application, and only for a portion of the project. If the town were to move forward in this way, there would be no certainty. There would be no certainty because whenever something comes up to us, and I think somebody mentioned this, what ordinance would we be using? Would we be using the one prior to the specific plan being approved? That's what I think we would be using, because that's what the specific plan refers to. Would we be using the ordinance that comes up after the specific plan has been approved? I say no, because you have to use the law that applies. And the law that applies is the law that existed when you did the deal. I understand that when you have any kind of business deal, including developments, things change. The person who got the approval wants to sell to somebody else. The principals who were involved, you know, they've gone somewhere else, or maybe they're doing something else. But the bottom line is that the law that applied when this application was approved were the zoning ordinances prior to 2018. And those are the ones that need to be applied. It's called the law that is applied. I do things like Ms. Jensen, I look stuff up too. And that is the law. And that creates certainty. Because if you're saying when the application and the specific plan were approved, we had a certain zoning law. I think it was approved in 2015. Then, parking ordinance. And then you can change it anytime after that. And anytime somebody comes in for an application or modification, they use some other parking ordinance. So I firmly believe that the law that applies to this ANS and to the specific plan is the zoning ordinance that in existence at the time both of those documents were approved, which is the parking ordinance of 2015, which existed in 2007, not anything in 2018.
Okay. Thank you for that very concise and thorough summary. Does that mean that you want to make a motion based on that?
Well, how can I ever resist a request like that? I wasn't going to make a motion, but based on our ordinance regarding appeals, I will move to deny the appeal based, like I said, in part on our ordinance, which defines what can and can't be granted in an appeal. And I will also encompass a summary version of what I just said.
Okay, let's see if we get a second for that motion. Councilwoman Sayoc has seconded the motion. Any comment that goes with your second? Or any request for any amendment?
No, there's no.
Not suggesting that there should be, but.
No, there's no request for amendment. And I think as has already been stated by the mayor and the vice mayor, this is just a perplexing case, an appeal in that it's being presented to us, and yet we have to somehow argue why our own laws don't even apply. And I find that just a perplexing case to be under.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second, Mr. Rennie.
So I'm gonna not support the motion. Whether it's perplexing or not, I think you can just go to the simple facts that the applicant has come to us and given us an opportunity to modify the project to our benefit, which I'm trying to do. I believe extra parking is bad for the reasons I gave. It encourages people to drive instead of take alternative methods. It makes our downtown less competitive, and it adds to the cost of providing the affordable housing. And I think that's one of the arguments that will be made. We also lose the opportunity to go and get our full BMP units. If we lose the opportunity to get more affordable units, which are very hard to get. I got to ask you, that's very simple. Why do you want extra parking? Just because you want to punish the developer or make them pay more money? But we could get something in exchange for them saving money on something that's not needed anyway. When the rest of if another project ever comes, they'll have to build parking for their own portion of phase 2. So to me, it doesn't make any sense to kind of mean-spiritedly force them to build parking that's not needed. And in fact, I think hurts our other goals in town when we could actually get something out of it. Councilmember Jensen said, well, why would they go with my proposal? Or they might not go with my proposal. Well, if you were to pass my proposal and they don't go with it, you're back exactly where you are right now, just denying it, right? If they go back and build the garage because they think it's a better solution, we're in no different place. If we take the chance that asking them to take 3 or maybe even 4 BMP units in exchange for removing the garage, we have a chance of gaining value in the town. I think the motion as it stands, we don't gain anything in town. In fact, I think it hurts us a little bit. So I won't support the motion, by the way.
Okay. Well, I appreciate Councilman Rennie's line of reasoning, and I also would like to produce housing. But the question is, how am I going to do that? This is kind of the speech I made when we redid our below market price housing regulations. It's like, we need to get housing produced. With the application that we have right now, we get housing produced. And if we support the motion that's on the floor now, we also support the work that went into the specific plan and the agreements that were made and the law that applied at the time. I don't think we can consider, I think it's frankly illegal to talk about or consider the effect that anything that we do here might have on downtown. I think it's anti-competitive, and I don't think we ought to be doing it. Our regulations should apply to everyone. But I don't see an incentive for a developer that wants to save money to lose money on market rate houses. The developer can always opt out of the request / requirement to produce more housing. And I am concerned that if we add a condition of producing more housing, that there is a better argument that the HAA is applicable because we are creating an infeasible housing project by requiring something else. I think by denying it and saying the HAA doesn't apply because it doesn't affect the housing produced in this development. And by the way, you don't reach the 2/3 requirement of the HAA mixed use to apply to the phase 1 part. We have a better argument. So I'm willing to support the motion based on those considerations. So I appreciate Mr. Rennie's line of thinking. Is there any other comments or discussion before I call the question? Okay, Vice Mayor?
Yes.
Councilwoman Seah?
Yes.
Councilman Rennie,
No,
and the mayor votes yes. So it passes 3-1. Is there any other action that the council needs to take with respect to this? Okay, with that, then I'm going to thank you, everyone, and adjourn the meeting for this evening and see you at our next meeting.